Hi, and a very welcome back to all students. So, today we are going to understand about the topic of biological clock. Um, so, biological clock is something that gives you an idea about the timing of the plant, right? So, by timing, I mean that how does a plant know that now it's my time to flower, or how does a plant know that now I need to give out seeds or now I need to give out birds, right? So it is basically all about the timing of plants. Though biological clock is a general term and it may also include the biological clock in humans, but since we are dealing with botany, and so we are going to study about biological clock in plants, right, with respect to plants, right? So we start. So as you all already must be knowing that every species, may it be any species, it has some requirements from its environment. So every species demands something from its environment, may it be a small plant or may it be animal or may it be human. We all require something from the environment to survive, right? And for plants, this requirement is needed at each stage of the life cycle. So a plant has many stages. It could be germination, it could be seedling growth, it could be seed dispersal, right? So all these stages, for example flowering, budding, right? So all of these stages, it has certain requirement from the environment. So many species, when environment changes, many species react to those changes. Rather, most of the species react to those changes, right? And according to the changes they might try to adjust themselves, right? So though every species has some requirement, if the environment is going to change, it reacts to those changes, and accordingly it adjusts itself to the environment if it can adjust, right? So here comes the term autecology. So autecology is basically a study that deals with the requirement and reaction of individual species. So autecology is basically a branch of ecology itself, and this branch of ecology deals mainly with the requirement of individual species and how does that individual species react when the environment change, right? So that is all about autecology, and in autecology single individual species is studied. For example, Catharanthus roseus is baramasi, right? So if somebody studies the requirement of this plant and how does this plant, the Catharanthus, how does this plant respond to changes in the environment, then that study would be included under the field of autecology, and this is a branch of ecology, right? So this is also termed as species ecology. Why? Because this branch basically deals with the requirement and reaction of individual species, one single species, right? Therefore it is also known as species ecology, right? So now you must be thinking that why am I studying autecology to understand biological clock, right? Your answer lies here. Why is this autecology studies are actually important? Because see, there are many disciplines of economic botany. What is economic botany? Economic botany that deals with plants that give economic valued products, right? Like say for example sandalwood, it is an economic plant. Say for example sarpagandha, it is an economic plant, right? So there are many disciplines like agriculture, silviculture, horticulture. All of these are disciplines of economic botany. We know India is an agricultural country. We on a daily basis produce so many of produce. Silviculture is the culturing of trees, and horticulture is culturing of garden ornamentals, right? So now there are all these disciplines of economic botany, and all of this are based on autecology of species. Now remember what I said in the previous slide, that autecology of species is autecology is a study that deals with requirements of the species, right? So in all of these fields we require a plant to cultivate, may it be agriculture or silviculture or horticulture. This requires cultivation of a plant. And so if you want to cultivate a plant, it is very important that there must be awareness about the requirements of plants, right? Because if you do not know what that particular plant require, then obviously you are not you may not be able to grow that plant. Though you might bring the saplings, though you might have seeds, and it may be possible that plants may grow, the seeds may give out seedlings, but it may later on dry because you do not know if what is the requirement of the plant is not going to grow, right? So the requirement of plant to grow is very important. Now this autecology of species actually gives you an idea of distribution, adaptation, and a speciation of a plant, of a species. So okay, we'll understand this point a little later. So as I told that to cultivate a plant you need to know its requirements. So for example, if we want to grow a rose plant, right, we need to know its requirements, right? So what are its requirements? It needs good sunlight, right? It cannot grow in shady area. It requires good watering, but waterlogging is not recommended, right? If you waterlog the pot, it will not grow. It requires good fertilizers, it requires good organic matter, right? It requires good mulch. So this is the requirement of a rose plant to grow. So if you don't give all of this, then the rose plant does not survive. And we see on a daily basis that many people, they try to grow rose at their home, but it does not grow, right? So the very simple thing is the requirements are not met, and that's why the plant is not growing, right? So now let us understand this point, that autecology gives an idea of distribution and adaptation. So we know that there are many species in the world, in the environment, and all of these species live in various kinds of habitats, right? They have their own habitats where they live. Now these species, some of these species, they are confined to limited area, right? And some grow in any kind of habitat. Why does this happen? Because since these species that are growing in limited area, they have very limited adaptation. They are not being able to adapt to the changing environment, and so they remain limited, right? Whereas there are some species that grow in any habitat. Some species, if you see, you may find it anywhere growing, right? Why? Because they have wide range of adaptation. They might have brought adaptation in themselves, because of which they can thrive in any kind of habitat, right? So I think now this point is clear, that the distribution could be limited, right? that is, it could be confined to a limited area, or it could grow in any kind of habitat because of adaptation, right? So because of adaptation, this can happen. And speciation is about the formation of a new species, actually from the old species. It's a kind of evolution. Now this evolution also happens because as the environment changes, the particular plant species, it tries to adapt, and during that course of adaptation, that plant actually evolves itself, and some changes are observed in this plant because of the changes in environment, and so we say that there is evolution of plant, right? So that species might actually look like a new species sometimes, different than its hereditary counterparts, right? So I hope this point is clear. Now comes the term biological clock, right? So I just read the definition for now, that there is so much synchronization of the phenological behavior of the species and the different factors of the environment that plants are spoken of as biological clock. So we can define biological clock either as this, or each species is able to tell a particular time of the year, and hence these species are said to be biological clocks, right? So I will explain you these two definitions later on. For now, let us first understand that what is phenology, because in the definition there is the term phenological behavior, right? So phenology is the study of periodic behavior in the life cycle events of plants influenced by seasonal variations, right? So phenology actually is kind of periodic behavior, the outer appearance of the plant, that after every periodic time, after certain time, during seasonal variations, what outer changes takes place, what physical changes take place in the life cycle of the plant, right? So study of periodic behavior, that is changes over certain period of time in the life cycle events of plants. So as I told, there are certain events in the plant's life cycle like germination, seedling growth, vegetative growth, right, reproduction. So these are all life cycle events. These are influenced by seasonal variations. Seasonal variations, by that we mean the external environmental factors, right? So phenology, in very short, is actually the change in the outer appearance of the plant, the physical appearance of the plant. That is called phenology, and this happens during every life cycle events, the different events that take place in the plant's life cycle. So this is called phenological behavior. That is, how does a plant respond to seasonal changes? So this phenological behavior could be leaf opening, leaf fall, it could be bud formation, it could be flowering, it could be fruiting, right? It is not only this, but any change that you observe in the plant, any physical change that you observe in the plant is its phenological behavior, right? So this phenological behavior is influenced by various environmental factors. So there are various environmental factors that are influencing this phenological behavior. For example, if a leaf has to open, there are certain environmental factors that affects the opening of the leaf. So how does a plant know that my leaf has to open? It depends upon the environmental factors, right? So all this phenological behavior actually are influenced by various environmental factors. So what could be the environmental factors that we are talking about? These are abiotic or biotic factors. Abiotic factors like temperature, light, wind, frost, etc. And biotic factors like sometimes interference of human beings, or sometime grazing of animals. These could also affect the phenological behavior of the plants, right? So now one question must be in your mind, that why we studied about autecology, right? Though the topic is about biological clock, because see, biological clock is a part of autecology. Autecology is a branch of ecology, and biological clock is a part of autecology. So as I told, that autecology is the requirement of the plant, of the species, and how does it react to the environment, react to the changes. That is autecological study. And if you see here, biological clock is all about phenological behavior, that is how the plant changes its physical appearance, which is influenced by environmental factor. So now can you relate that autecology and biological clock are related? Biological clock is a part of autecology, and that's why I included autecology as an introduction, so that you can relate the two terms, right? So okay, so this actually tells how a plant like flowers, right? And it tells the internal timing of the plant. So in short, biological clock is also a kind of internal timing of the plant, which is influenced by external factors. So both of these two things are in so much synchronization, right? The internal timing and the external factors are so much related to each other that these are called as biological clock. For example, internal timing of the plant, that is, how does a plant know that I am going to flower now? It knows by the external factors that it is going to have. So if it has the proper external factor to flower, it is going to flower, right? If it has the proper environmental factor to give out seedling, right? So the internal clock of the plant, it will give out seedling, right? So this is actually a very very synchronized plan, where you cannot separate these two things. These two things are happening because internal timing is influenced by external factors, right? So now we come to our definition, right? I hope now the definition would be clear to you, that there is so much synchronization of the phenological behavior, that is the outer appearance of the plant that takes place, right, of the species, and the different factors. The different factors here, we mean the external factors of the environment, that plants are spoken of as biological clocks. So there is so much synchronization between these two things that we call the plant as a biological clock, right? And the next definition is that each species is able to tell a particular time of the year, and hence the species are said to be biological clock, right? Okay, I'll explain you this definition in the next slide, but I hope the very first definition would be very much clear to you, right? So now, as I told that every plant has certain requirements, so these requirements are different for every stages, right? So we know that there are various stages. These are germination, growth, flowering, fruiting, leaf fall, etc. Right? So there could be n number of stages in the life cycle of a plant, and all of this have certain requirements from the environment, right? So the requirements for all of these stages are different, as I told, and the requirements that they have are different at different times of the year, right? By that I mean that if germination has to take place, its time would be different, right? And its requirement would be different. If growth has to take place, vegetative growth has to take place, its timing during the year would be different and its requirements would be different. If flowering has to take place, its timing during the year would be different and its requirement would be different, right? So simultaneously these two also has the same pattern. So the requirement is different for all of this, and this happens at different time of the year. So from this we can say that a plant actually tells a particular time of the year. Say for example there is a plant which germinates in only in June, right? So that means that plant is telling a time of the year which is June, and it tells that its requirements are met during June, right? Similarly, and if that plant has its vegetative growth in maybe August or September, right? So that means that the plant tells a particular time of the year. It tells that this is August or September, and it has its own requirements which are met during that time. So these all stages, they tell us a different time of the year, and here we can now relate the second definition which I had told, that every species tells a certain time of the year from its life cycle stages. So the plant actually tells a particular time of the year, and therefore also a plant can be called as a biological clock, right? So as I told, these requirements are most of the external weather conditions, so we call it as a biological clock. So this is an imaginary figure which tells that a plant has its own internal timing. It has its time to have seeds, to germinate, right, to give seedlings, to have vegetative growth, to have flowers, to have fruits, and again seed dispersal and all, right? So this is the biological clock influenced by external environment, right? And these two things, the internal timing and the external environment, are in total synchronization, that you cannot separate the two things, right? So different species actually differ in their response to environmental factors. Now it is not that every species will have same requirement. There is a rose plant, there is say a grass, say a tree, then all of these will have different requirements for different stages in their life cycle from the environment. So in Autecology, each stage in the life cycle of plant is studied in detail, right? And Autecology, as I told, is the study of life cycle events. How does the plant what are its requirement, and how does it react to change in the environment? So to understand that, in ecology, every stage in the life cycle of a plant is studied in very detail. It is done also in field and also in laboratory conditions. So the study that is carried out is according to the following plan, that is basically divided into three parts: the name, morphology and geographical distribution, natural distribution, and regeneration. Right now, these two do not have any other bifurcations, but regeneration has a big bifurcation which we need to study, which is actually important because which tells us about what biological clock is and how these are related to each other. So we start with the understanding of all of these three. So starting with the very first type, which is name, morphology and geographical distribution. So as the title itself suggests, here we need to know everything about the plant's history. Like we need to know about we need to have its information. Basically it could be botanical name and local name. It is geographical distribution, that is in which part of the globe this particular plant is present. What is its geographical distribution? Is it present in India? Is it present in India as well as some other places? So by that we can know that in which environment it grows. We need to know its history, that was that plant does that plant really grows in that environment only, or previously that plant has grown in some other environments also. So we need to also find out its history. Then morphological variations. Now see, a plant might have morphological variations also. Say for example, there is a plant which is called ajma, right? So okay, forget about ajma, we just take example of any plant. Sometimes they will have their morphological variations depending upon the environment. If you grow a plant in dry conditions, that the plant might grow, but its part, if you observe, it would adapt accordingly. It will have fleshy leaves, small leaves, it would be thick, right? It will have reduced shoot, right, if you grow in dry conditions. But now if you grow the same plant in open space, in sunlight, in wet conditions, right, in moist conditions, then the same plant will grow, will have big leaves, will have thin leaves, it will have long shoots, right, it will be more green, because the environmental conditions that has been given to it, the plant reacts accordingly. So I was actually giving an example of ajma plant, but I don't know, you people must not have seen, or you may have seen. So ajma plant, actually if you grow in a pot, it will have thick fleshy leaves, and it will not require much water, but it will grow nice. But if you grow that plant in open space, it will become tall, it will have long shoots, it will have very broad leaf, right? So these are morphological variations of the same plant, and this tells you about the environmental conditions. Now the fossil evidences, if that plant has become extinct, then what do you know about its fossil conditions? Because the fossil evidences tell you that in what kind of environment that plant must have survived and why it is not surviving now, because the environment is not favorable for it. And also to know about its migration routes, that why has this plant actually migrated from that place to some other place, so what is the route. So this also tells that how the plant was trying to escape the environmental conditions by migrating, right? So these all data is usually taken. Now the next thing is natural distribution. So natural distribution deals with habitat of the species, the soil characteristic, the light relations, the inter and intra-specific competitions, and modification due to changing environmental conditions. So natural distribution is basically that what are the conditions in this the plant the conditions in which the plant lives, right? So this deals with the habitat. We need to know the habitat of the species, the soil characteristics, what kind of soil, right, what kind of pH, light relations, what kind of light requirement it has, the various inter and intra specific, that is competitions, that is competition between species of the same type and competition between different species, and what are the modifications that the plant has gone through due to changing in environmental conditions. So as I told that there could be certain plant, there could be certain species that will grow in limited natural area, and there could be certain species which will grow in wider range of natural distribution. So this is because of the ecological amplitude of the species. So for those who do not know what is ecological amplitude is the extent to which a plant can adapt itself to the changing environment. It is called ecological amplitude, right? So how much can a plant adapt itself to the pace of the environment, to the changing environment? That is called its ecological amplitude. So this defines that why some plants have limited natural area, because they are not able to adapt, and so they decide that I have to remain limited in this area because I cannot adapt to the environmental condition. So this is the place where I have to survive, because this is where I can survive, right? And then comes the plants that have good ecological amplitude. So they have higher ecological amplitude, so they have adapted themselves, and as they have adapted, so there is wider range of natural distribution, so they have good distribution, right? So see, this is internal timing, right? How does a plant know that I cannot adapt and so I am limited here? This is a biological clock. Now the next third thing according to the plant is regeneration. So regeneration is basically divided into average seed output, viability of seeds, seed dormancy, reproductive capacity, seed dispersal, seedling growth, vegetative propagation, and reproductive growth, right? So these are the parts of regeneration that we are going to study. And regeneration is basically the way by which a plant increases its number. So regeneration, we already know what it is, right? So all of these are included under regeneration, and these actually all of these are very simple and you will understand very easily. It's just that it looks long, but it is easy for you to understand, right? So we take each of this one after the another. So the very first thing that we are going to understand in regeneration is seed output. So what is seed output, right? So seed output is basically in one batch, a plant in one single go, how many seeds does a plant produce is called its seed output. So what happens generally is that a plant will usually produce more seeds than the habitat can sustain. It will usually produce more seeds because the plant knows that most of it is going to get wasted, or it is going to get destructed or consumed by various animals or birds, and so by default the plant will produce seeds which, if all the seeds grow, the habitat will not be able to sustain, right? But the plant knows that all the seeds are not going to grow, and therefore the plant will generally produce more seeds because only a few from it will grow into a plant. So these are basically, most of these are wasted or destructed or consumed by maybe insects or animals like this, right? So there are many insects or animals that eat seeds, right? And Therefore, as I told, seed output is about the number of seeds produced in single seed flush. How many seeds a plant produces in a single go. That tells its seed output. So, different species they vary in their average seed output. This depends upon environmental conditions like light intensity, moisture, biotic factor, and age, etc. So, as I told, this is a life cycle event of a plant seed output, right? And this is a kind of phenological behavior where every plant will have this average seed output, but this depends upon environmental factors, which means that this is influenced by environmental factors like all of this, right? So we already know that if there would be good moisture, then the seeds will grow, right? Like biotic factor, as I told, this animal, that is squirrel, is a biotic factor. If it eats the seeds, like there are many squirrels, and if they eat the seeds, right, so the seed output is going to decrease. So every plant has different seed output. Annuals, they usually produce seeds once in their lifetime. Perennials, shrubs or trees, they produce seeds once in a year. Though there are exceptional cases where perennials or shrubs are also known to produce seeds twice a year, but this is a general pattern. So these plants have their seed output once in their lifetime, the annuals, right, and the perennials have it once in a year. So we can define the average seed output with this formula, which says that total number of seeds has to be divided by number of plants from which seeds are collected. This is average seed output, right? Total number of seeds, that is total कितने seeds है, and the number of plants from which seeds are collected. और हमने कितने plants ऐसे हैं जिसमें से seeds collect किए हैं, right? So if we divide this, we get the average seed output, right? I hope you are clear with it. It is the number of seeds produced in one single seed flush, and this depends upon the environmental conditions. So this is a biological clock. And seed output is also influenced by such kind of activities like grazing. Okay, so now we understand the next part of regeneration, which is seed dispersal. So now, as we saw first, that the seed output has already taken place. The seed are present in the environment. Now these seeds need to be dispersed, right? So what is seed dispersal? It is the movement or transport of seeds or propagules from the parent plant, right? So जो parent plant में से seeds develop हुए, अब उन seeds को they have to get transported to other areas, right? So it has to move. So that is called seed dispersal, right? So this is a general term. It could be seed dispersal, it could be fruits dispersal, it could be vegetative parts dispersal like bulbs, bulbils, it could be spores dispersal if we are talking about fungi and all. It could be shoot apices dispersal. It depends, right? So the main point is dispersal. That is the part, whatever it is, may it be seed or any vegetative part, it has to travel at certain place to get dispersed. Now this is usually done by agents like animals, wind, water, insects, etc. So we know that there are agents that do this work of dispersal. For example, this could be animals or birds. They often come over the tree and they sit and they in the course of their interaction, right, with the plant, they will sometimes carry the seeds and disperse here and there. Then it could be because of wind, right, or it could be because of water. Maybe water brings the seeds and the seeds start germinating somewhere else, right. So this availability of these agents is a very important factor for a plant to grow. Now see, if these agents are not present, the next life cycle event is not going to happen, because the plant knows that for my seeds to grow into new plant, it has to get dispersed, right. So it will not happen that it is there in the fruit itself, and in the fruit the seeds are present, and in the fruit itself the seed will start germinating. This will not happen, but the fruit, maybe it has to fall down, maybe it has to be carried away by some agent, and then it will germinate. So this is a biological clock. The plant knows, the tree knows that my seeds has to be dispersed, and the seed then knows that then later on it can germinate. So this is also a biological clock example. The next step is viability of seeds, right. So viability tells that which seeds are capable of germinating in suitable conditions. So it is basically the capability of germinating that the seeds have. Not all seeds are viable in a single seed output, right. All the seeds are not viable. Some are viable, some are not viable. So viable means the capability of germinating of that seed, right. So now as seed output has taken place, seeds are out in the environment and the seed has also dispersed. Now the seed will have to germinate. So here comes the term viability of seeds. In nature, basically to withstand the adverse conditions, seeds after shedding remain on or in the soil, water or mud, right. So what happens usually in nature, if there is adverse condition, then the seeds will after shedding, that is after separating from the parent plant, wherever it will reach, it will remain either over the soil surface, water surface or mud surface as it is, right. And they can remain as it is there for a longer period of time until it receives a favorable condition. So a viable seed, if it has to germinate, it has to get a favorable condition, right. So if it gets its proper environmental condition, these seeds can germinate. These are called viable seeds, and in nature usually such kind of viability is for longer periods. So seeds usually have longer period in the life before they lose their germination capability. So if I say that a seed is not viable, it means that the seed has lost its germination capability. But seeds usually have longer period of viability, right, and this is called its viability period, during which it remains over the surface as it is, waiting for the favorable conditions to come in. See, again this is a biological clock. The seeds know that I need proper environmental condition to let the embryo out, right. So this is also a biological clock. Now the factors responsible usually for viability of seeds are depth, at what depth the seeds are present, water content, temperature, microbial population, because all of this can contribute to seeds remaining viable, right. So every plant has different period of viability. For example, Shoria robusta, right, it has a viability period of only a week. The seeds of leguminous plants, this is a pea plant, it has viability period of 15 to 50 years. That means it can remain viable, it has germination capability of 15 to 50 years, but it requires proper conditions. And the plant Nilumbo is nothing but your lotus, it has a germination capability or viability of seeds of 3000 years. The seeds can remain viable for 3000 years, right? So every plant has different viability of seeds, viability period, right? Shoria robusta is called sal tree, and this is used to make incense sticks, that is agarbatti, and it also has ayurvedic importance. So okay, this is just for your information, we don't have to go deep into it. So this is about viability. Please keep this term in mind, that this is the capability of germinating in suitable conditions. It requires favorable conditions. Why am I telling to remember this? Because the next topic is seed dormancy. The next slide is of seed dormancy, which is related to this. So now let us understand what is seeds dormancy. So as I told that as the seeds are mature, any seed that is mature will germinate, right, with proper environmental condition. We call such seed a viable seed, right? But there are certain seeds which will not germinate though they receive proper environmental conditions. Please note this point, right? Viability and dormancy are two different things, right? Here germination takes place is if proper environmental conditions are available, but here there are certain seeds which will not germinate even though the proper environmental conditions are available. So such seeds are called dormant seeds, and the phenomena is called seed dormancy. The process is called seed dormancy, right? Now this dormant seeds or dormancy could be due to other reasons other than environmental factors. These are an immature embryo. Now see, these are internal factors that are causing dormancy. It could be an immature embryo, that is, the embryo present inside the seed is not mature enough to germinate right now, right? So the seed might need some time to mature the embryo, and maybe then it will germinate. Then the second thing is hard seed coat. Sometimes we know that seed has seed coat, right, the outer covering. So when the outer covering is very hard, right, so the embryo might not be able to come out because of the hard covering. And the next thing is germination inhibitors in seeds, that is in seeds sometimes there are certain chemicals present which inhibit the germination. So all of these factors are internal to seeds, these are not environmental factors. So due to these internal factors, the seeds will remain dormant until this dormancy is broken, right, and then the seeds can germinate. So a very important point to note is that seed dormancy, right, seed dormancy is actually temporary failure of viable seed to germinate in conditions that are favorable for germination. So seed dormancy is nothing but the temporary failure of the viable seeds itself to germinate even though it is receiving environmental proper conditions, right? So a point to notice that viable seeds can be dormant seeds. It is kind of a failure to germinate because of internal factors, right? This is also actually biological clock, because this is internal. The plant knows that there is some internal problem, and due to that the plant is not germinating, right? So if this is broken, then the plant will germinate. So ultimately it is the viable seed itself, but it will not germinate in proper environmental conditions because of the internal factors, right? So there is one another term that we need to understand, is that some seeds, they will start germinating when favorable conditions are obtained. So they will germinate when they receive favorable condition, but when you withdraw that condition, what will happen? It will become dormant, and therefore this term is called secondary dormancy. Okay, let me explain this with an example. For example, there is a plant, a seed, some seeds, right? Seed of a plant. That seed require daylight of 4 to 5 hours to germinate. So you are giving that seeds a daylight of 4 to 5 hours. Now this is its favorable condition and it will start germinating. But as soon as you withdraw that condition, as soon as you stop the plant, stop the seeds from getting 4 to 5 hours of daylight, which is its favorable condition, then which means that you have withdrawn the conditions. So now the seeds will again become dormant, right? And this dormancy is called secondary dormancy, right? So actually seed dormancy or dormancy of plant or seeds is a very very big topic, not for you to understand in much detail. So there are various methods of breaking dormancy. If you want to understand actually those things, then I have a separate video already made on it, on methods of breaking dormancy. And what is seed dormancy? There are already things present in there. You can just go and learn about dormancy more there. So for now this much is enough for you, right? Okay, a very important part of our life. These seeds that you see, these are your pulses, your all the grains, your makai and all the kind of pulses, the moong dal, the tuvar dal, right? And all kind of your rice. These all are dormant seeds, and these are very important because it is not that it cannot germinate. It is just that it has its dormancy has not been broken up, and you have to break its dormancy to make it germinate. You can use these pulses to grow plant from it. These are viable, but these are dormant. And imagine that if all these pulses and all, they do not have dormancy, then imagine that they are in your hands and they directly germinate. I think that most of the food that we eat will not be available to us, because dormancy is the factor that is acting for us to serve the food that we need, right? Now let us understand seed germination and reproductive capacity. So usually there are many seeds, but all of these seeds that are present, they do not germinate, because this happens due to many reasons, right? There are many reasons that can contribute to not germinating the seeds. Not all will germinate, but some will do. So here comes the term reproductive capacity. Reproductive capacity indicate the pressure of the upon the environment. It indicates its pressure upon the environment. That is, what pressure does a particular seed put upon the environment to come out as a seedling. That is called its reproductive capacity. Right now, again, there are various environmental factors that can act for reproductive capacity for seed germination. Right, this is light, temperature, water, levels of oxygen, CO2 concentration and all. Right, so this seed germination and reproductive capacity are both related. So as I told, reproductive capacity is the pressure that the seeds will put upon the environment to germinate. Right, now this means that better the reproductive capacity or higher the reproductive capacity, higher the chances of survival and dispersal. The more the reproductive capacity, the more the chances of survival and dispersal, which means that the more the seeds will be able to put pressure upon the environment to come out, so obviously there will be better chances of surviving and dispersal. Right, so according to Salisbury, reproductive capacity can be calculated as average seed output and into percentage germination, which means that how many seeds has the plant produced, प्लांट ने कितना सीड्स प्रोड्यूस किया है. राइट, इट हैज़ टू बी मल्टीप्लाइड विथ परसेंटेज जर्मिनेशन, मतलब कितने सीड्स प्रोड्यूस किए हैं. फॉर एग्जांपल 50 सीड्स प्रोड्यूस किए हैं, उसमें से कितने जर्मिनेट हो रहे हैं उसका परसेंटेज निकालना है. सो 50 सीड्स प्रोड्यूस किए हैं, उसमें से 40 जर्मिनेट हो रहे हैं, इट हैज़ अ गुड रिप्रोडक्टिव कैपेसिटी. 50 प्रोड्यूस किए हैं बट 20 ही जर्मिनेट हो रहे हैं, इट्स रिप्रोडक्टिव कैपेसिटी इज़ नॉट गुड, विच मीन्स दैट इट इज़ नॉट एबल टू पुट प्रेशर अपॉन द एनवायरमेंट. Right, I hope that reproductive capacity is clear with you. It defines that how much pressure can a seed produce upon the environment to come out to germinate. Now next is seedling growth. Now see, this seedling growth means what? That from the seed, the very new small little plant that come is called seedling. So this is actually a very critical phase in the life cycle of a plant, because this is critical because see, the plant which is very small is exposed to such extremes of environmental factors. It has to face all the extreme environmental factors. This could be pathogens. So what happens sometimes, as soon as a seedling come out, pathogen attack them, right? It could be very harsh extremes of temperature as in deserts. It could be the less availability of water, which could lead to drought kind of conditions. And if all of these extreme environmental factors continues to prevail, then there are chances that the new seedling might die. Right, so this is a very critical phase in the life cycle of plant, where it has to face all the extremes of environmental factors. The various environmental factors that affect the seedling growth are leaf formation, chlorophyll development, adequate light, proper temperature, water, soil and light condition. So leaf formation, chlorophyll development is very important, because if leaf forms, then it will be able to have chlorophyll and it can photosynthesize in presence of light, right? And so then it can prepare its own food and grow into a new plant, a good adult plant. It's all of these environmental factors are important. So also there are certain disturbances that can stop the seedling growth. This could be the interference of birds or insects that can damage the little seedlings. It could be because of grazing, because animals when graze they don't see that whether it is seedling or a big plant, right? These are grazing animals, they need food and they might eat the seedlings as well. So the seedling growth can reduce because of these reasons, right? So in nature, usually the seedling mortality rate is more. What is seedling mortality? The death rate. Similarly, natality is the birth rate. So in nature, you can observe that seedling mortality, the death rate is usually more. And because many reasons actually play a role in this, not all seedlings will grow into a complete plant, but some of it will, right? It is all about survival of the fittest. So this seedling growth is also a part of biological clock, because the plant will grow into a complete adult plant only if all of these environmental conditions are present, and these environmental factors influence the life cycle event which is seedling growth. Next is vegetative growth. So after the seedling has established, that is if the seedling has successfully established, so obviously there has to be further growth, that is the plant need to have shoots, it need to have more leaves, it need to have more branches. So plant reacts with these conditions and tries to adapt itself. So now the plant, as it has to have vegetative growth, it reacts with the present conditions and it will try to adjust or adapt itself according to the conditions. The environmental factors that influence the vegetative growth is soil conditions and also all kind of aerial conditions. By aerial conditions I mean like carbon dioxide, the presence of oxygen, the temperature, the light, all of these are aerial conditions, that is apart from edaphic factors. Now every species has its own environmental requirement for growth and has its own ecological amplitude of tolerance, right? So as I told, as we just saw, that for vegetative growth to take place, the plant will react with the present conditions and it will try to adapt itself, which means that this is called the ecological amplitude. But every species will have its own ecological amplitude of tolerance, right? So which means that in simple terms, every species will have a tolerance to adaptation, right? Which means that only up to a certain limit the species can adapt, but if the conditions becomes more harsh, then the species might not adapt. So that is called the ecological amplitude of tolerance. And every species, though it has environmental requirement, it will try to adapt depending upon its ecological amplitude, and but it can only adapt up to a certain limit, so it has its level of tolerance, right? Now as I told, what is ecological amplitude, I already explained, I think more than 3 to 4 times. This is the degree of adaptation of a living organism to changes in its environment. Now this degree of adaptation has a certain limit, a certain tolerance. Now adaptation, certain plants are less adaptable, so such plants are given the prefix teno. For example, plants that have less adaptation to temperature are called stenothermal. Similarly, plants that have wide range of adaptation are given the prefix uri. And so we can take an example of this term, eurythermal, which means that these plants have high range of adaptation for temperature. So these are called eurythermal. Likewise, there could be stenohaline, less adaptable to salt, euryhaline, more adaptable to salt conditions. So adaptations, it could be species that could be less adaptable, the steno ones, species that could be highly adaptable, the eury ones, right? And this defines the distribution. So less adaptable ones, the steno ones, will have limited area of distribution. These will have a wide range of area of distribution. Now there is another thing, that if a species gets some changes in the environment, it will either develop different kinds of structure to adapt to the environment. For example, say xerophytic plants. What are these? These are plants like cacti. They have developed adaptation to very dry, harsh environment of desert. So they have developed certain structures in them to adapt to the situation. For example, since they grow in dry environment, they store water in them. So they have structures to store water. This is their adaptation. This is one thing. Or if the plant is not able to adapt, so then it is going to limit their distribution, because the plant is since not able to adapt to the situation, it will rather choose to limit itself to a certain area rather than trying to adapt, and in that attempt it might lose, the plant itself might get lost. So the plant then decides to limit its own distribution, right? Now we can here take the example of weed and grasses. So this is a weed, right? See what is happening. This is a very small plant. This is a rocky surface, not good for every plant to grow. So a weed is a plant. See, what is the characteristic of weed? That weed can grow in any kind of situation, right? You do not want it to grow, but it will grow because it has adapted to this situation. So you can often find weeds, they have very short stem, right? They will produce flowers in that very small plant. They will complete their life cycle in this very small condition, right? They will have reduced stem, reduced leaf, because the plant knows that, see, I will not get anything of enough to survive in here. So then the weeds, they modify themselves according to the environment, and therefore they are like adapted to many kind of environment. This is an example of a weed. And this is also a weed, right? You must all have already seen. This is Lantana camera. Lantana camera is a weed. Invasive species, came from outside of India, but today this plant is a part of most of the forest of India, destroying many trees. Why? Because this tree has adapted to all kind of environment. It can grow in more rainfall, it can grow in less rainfall as well. It can grow in harsh summer, it can grow in cold environment as well. It can grow in dry condition, it can grow in wet condition. So it has adapted to all kind of environmental condition, and this has led to the invasive growth of this plant. So that means that this plant is not limiting its distribution because it is adaptable, right? So this is about vegetative growth. It is all about environmental conditions and adaptation, and this is a part of biological clock again. Now the next is reproductive growth. So we know that every plant actually reproduce sexually to produce flowers and fruits, right? And these fruits contain seeds which has to be dispersed. So there are three things that are included in reproductive growth. These are flowering, pollination and fruiting, right? So once flower is formed, so pollination has to take place, right? That is the dispersal of the male part, right, has to take place, and then after that fertilization will take place and fruit will be formed which will have seeds, and then seed dispersal take place. So all of these are included in reproductive growth. Now there are certain agents that help in pollination and seed dispersal. For example, these are agents that are helpful in pollination. They sit over a flower and the pollen, it gets attached to them, and later on this pollen they get dispersed to other flowers, right? And then fertilization take place. This is seed dispersal, where sometimes fruits are eaten up by a tree and the seeds they fall down are dispersed by them, right? Then now the species, they vary in their time, structure, number of flowering and agents of flowering. Species vary in their light requirement, which is called photoperiodism, right? And the species vary in their temperature requirement also, which is called vernalization, right? So every species has its own time of flowering, has its own time of pollination, has its own time of fruiting, has its own structure of flowering, has its own structure of fruit, has its own number of flower, has its own number of fruits, and the agents also vary. Now why does a particular plant choose that time? Might be because the agents would be available at that time only. For example, a plant has a flowering time of June, right? So that means that the plant has chosen that time because the agents that actually are more during June only. Agents that can disperse their pollen may be more during June. So that is why their timing might be June, right? Their structure would be such that that agent can enter their structure, and the number depends upon how much pollen might be needed to disperse to have fertilization. So a plant may produce more flowers to produce more pollen, so that better fertilization can take place. So this is again a part of biological clock, which is reproductive growth. It is also affected by all of these environmental factors. Now very last thing that we are going to understand is vegetative growth. So this is very simple. Reproduction by vegetative means is called vegetative growth. So here no seeds are involved. Most of the, though many plants have vegetative growth, but most of the aquatic plants, they produce only vegetatively. So sometimes what happens, that small segments of plants, for example if you know hydrilla, what happens in such aquatic plants, the plants will have small segments, due to any agents or due to water flow or anything, a small segment will be removed and it will move to new distances with the flow of water and regenerate into new plants at new places. So this is how vegetative propagation take place. Environmental factors that influence are availability of agents, flowing water, salinity, oxygen content and light level. So okay students, so that is it. Now this is the last thing I kept last, because this is the summary of everything that I explained. Now, as I told, biological clock is a synchronization between the life cycle events of the plant with the environmental factors. See in this figure, this is a plant species that has, this is its vegetative cycle: vegetative, reproduction, pollination, propagation, viability, sprouting, and this cycle is its reproductive cycle. So here it's seed establishment, vegetative growth, I explained already, flowering, pollination, fruiting, seed output we saw, seed dispersal we saw, dormancy we saw, viability, right, and percentage seed germination, seed mortality. All of these are life cycle events of plant, and these events are influenced by environmental factors, maybe one environmental factor or maybe two. Say for example flowering, so it may be influenced by temperature, may be influenced by light, may be influenced by atmosphere at the same time. So this is called an environmental complex, where the various life cycle events, the phenological behavior that takes place in plant depends upon the environmental condition. This is called an environmental complex, and this is it about biological clock. So as I told, biological clock is all about the internal timing of the plant, which is in very much synchronization with the outer environmental characters, right, environmental conditions. So this is it for today. I hope that this topic must be clear with you, but in case if you have any doubt, feel free to ask, I'll clear it, right. So I'll be back with a new topic soon. Till then, please clear your doubts. Yes. And in case if you have not yet subscribed to my channel, please subscribe to my channel Funful Life and hit the bell icon to stay updated. Thank you.